We'll just wait for everybody to join. Give it another minute or so. Right, I think we just get going. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this very important day, International Women's Day, which is one of the reasons why I must get off the screen as quickly as possible. But just to say, the UKAA have been supporting International Women's Day for some time now. I think we have a reasonable track record in this regard, but there's still a long, long way to go. But what I'm most proud of is the fact that we have created an EDI committee, of which this is one of their functions, looking at the whole inclusivity in build to rent. And this has been developed and is with Stephanie Smith, who is the chair of that group and has done sterling work in this area. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Stephanie. Stephanie.
Good morning, and thank you everybody for joining us on this. Hopefully it's sunny where you are, but it's sunny up in Milton Keynes, and it's a beautiful Friday morning. So I really want to thank you for joining. I wanted to talk a little bit about International Women's Day, and really, is it still relevant? Well, I will say what it means is a lot more than the mass emails that have been pinging through my phone all morning long, offering me 20% off at any shop that I've ever walked into. Don't know about you, but I'm sure you're probably all in the same boat. Now, this has a long history, and really it started in the early 1900s, and this was really a time of industrial expansion, and it brought volatility into the workforce. Long hours, poor wages, while not being allowed to vote really ignited this powder keg. And in 1908, 15,000 women protested and walked the streets of New York City, back in home for me, for improved work conditions and voting rights. In 1909, the first National Women's Day was appointed in the US, and it was celebrated the last Sunday of February. The ripple effect took hold, spurred by the suffragette movement, and empowered women across the world to find their voice over the next years. And a coalition of 17 international countries found common ground for women and men alike to join together for positive change and to progress equality. However, it did take until actually 1975 to be recognized by the United Nations. And then in December of 77, the General Assembly adopted a resolution proclaiming a United Nations Day for Women's Rights and International Peace. Is it still relevant? Well, when we consider that on average, a woman is killed by a man every 3 days. Rape and sexual assault average 11 per hour for both men and women combined. And these are only the ones who have been reported. And this isn't globally. This is in the UK alone. And while men and boys suffer from many of these same forms of abuse, it is not, and that's not to minimize that fact, these are disproportionately affecting women. And no, it's not always as brutal as violence. Today, the gender pay gap has backslid, and the UK is now 17th among 33 benchmark countries in the OECD, down from 14th 2 years ago. And there is still a 5% median pay gap. This means that for every pound a man makes, we are making about 85p. Current studies show that we will not hit equal pay until 2051. The 2022 Gender Equality in the Workplace report by Randstad, which surveys about 6,000 working adults in May, also found that the majority, 72% of women, had either encountered or witnessed inappropriate behavior from male colleagues at work, and that 2/3, so 67% of women, had experienced gender discrimination in some form. So is it relevant? I'd say yes. Today, International Women's Day is honored in over 30 countries, giving focus to issues such as gender equality, reproductive rights, and violence and abuse against women. Today, I am joined by three phenomenal women, peers who are leaders in their fields and who I personally hold in high regard. We're going to hear from each of them about their journey, hurdles, victories, and how we can work together to build a more inclusive and equitable workplace. I'll turn to each person to introduce themselves. Alison, why don't we start with you?
Good morning, thanks, Steph. Good morning, everybody. I'm the CEO of the Safety Letterbox Company, and we are manufacturers of mailboxes and parcel boxes, and heavily involved in the built environment over the last 38 years. I'm proud to be winners of the Love to Rent Awards, Best Supplier to the BTR industry.
And Grace?
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Grace Oyosoro. I'm the head of operations for Quintain Living. So that involves the Wembley Park project and just over 3,300 apartments. I oversee the fantastic team that does all things resident experience, financial performance, and retention.
And Bella?
Hi everybody, I'm Bella Savory. I'm a partner in the real estate team at the London office of Womble Pond Dickinson. I've been working in the development sector for about 8 years now, 9 years. Been involved in lots of single family and multifamily housing deals, and I head up the build to rent offering from our London office.
And as Brendan mentioned, my name is Stephanie Smith, and I am the chair for the EDI committee, which we just launched recently. However, we started work on this quite some time ago, and it's great to see it come to fruition. My day job, the other hat, is also as head of living sector for Hubble. We are an end-to-end advisory group. From the investment feasibility all the way through to fit out, design, FF&E, and operational and asset management strategy. But today I'm here with my UKAA hat on, and really excited to talk to these wonderful women. You know, we all know how broad conversations about EDI can be. They pertain to every aspect of society, and it's readily shown that companies with a more diverse employee base have tangible results in retention, innovation, and ultimately returns. So Alison, if I can start with you, you know, you really are an icon in manufacturing. You're on multiple boards and often find yourself the only female in the room across your very successful career. You know, only about 29% of the manufacturing workforce are female, and that's across all levels. And of that, only a very few really reach exec level. I'd love to have you share a bit about your journey. How did you get into the industry, the experience around that? And, you know, as we've progressed, do you feel that recruitment and career progression programs are changing to attract a wider demographic into the manufacturing business?
Thanks, Steph. I'm just waiting for a fire alarm to go off any second, can you believe it? So I might have to disappear and be really unprofessional, but yeah, 30% of females, 30% of manufacturing is made up by females, less than 1% female CEOs in manufacturing. If you add on top of that, the sectors we supply to are heavily male dominated. It becomes a very non-female space. That's changing, of course, and gone are the days of calendars of nude women and macho and arrogant environments, should I say. I'm delighted that those days are way behind us. And by and large, most manufacturing companies I speak to are inclusive, open, and encouraging women to join. My career started in retail when, after years of accelerated promotion, I found myself as a store manager of a large store when only 8 of them were female out of a 45 group. And then entering manufacturing, I was the only female. And working my way through departments, I implemented systems and processes. And there was change, there was resistance, and the equality, diversity, inclusion was in its infancy 20 odd years ago. I've lost count of the amount of meetings, events, board meetings where I've been the only female. But I have to say that we're setting the stall out to encourage and attract young people into this space. And it brings so much into the diversity and the mix. And, you know, we need to recognise that everyone stands together to get the best chance of success. Whatever your gender, race, or anything else, if you operate professionally with the right skill and knowledge, aptitude and attitude, you can succeed, everyone together as equals. And those differences in approach, different abilities, and different strengths, that mix complements each other, of course, and results in a great team. And doesn't actually mean one is naturally more superior because of gender or anything else. But this is deep-rooted and what generations have always witnessed and experienced. And I think for me, some of the battles that I've had to overcome, some of the boards that I've sat on, some of which have been large, and I've still been the only female, we are moving away from that slowly, but it is still a fact that there is bullying, people are ridiculed, you are not treated different, you are treated differently, and you often see women working so extra hard to prove their worth and to juggle so many commitments. But I think, you know, it does come back to young people now coming into and being attracted into our industries, and how confident and resilient those people are to be able to handle it head on.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to have include some conversation in a few moments about imposter syndrome and juggling it and the expectations for us to be super women and really handle all of it without ever faltering. And I think that's a pressure we put on ourselves, but we'll tackle that in just a moment. I would like to turn to Bella. You know, I mean, Bella, likewise, women are so underrepresented in law firms. And, you know, I recognize this on a high level, but as I was kind of taking a look at statistics around this as we prepared, I hadn't realized that only about 28% of women actually achieve full equity partner appointments. And if we further dive into the demographics across the board, law firms have a small portion of employees with disabilities, only about 5%. And actually, as we impact even more and we look at the difference with ethnicity profiles between one partner firms and large firms, it's very, very marked. It's a very huge variable there. You know, and the proportion of partners from a BAME group are 4 times more likely in a small firm and less likely to actually reach that in large firms. So in you know, smaller firms where it's kind of 1 to 2 partners, it's about 36%. And as the number of partners grows, that diminishes greatly, and it drops down to 8% in large law firms. So, I mean, please share a bit about your journey, because really I find you absolutely inspirational. Love talking to you, your passion for both real estate as well as for, you know, getting people into the industry on a more diverse basis. So tell me a little bit about your journey in life, your career in reaching partner, and also, given the numbers around diversity in law, what more could be done to encourage women and all different categories, all, you know, very diverse background into the profession of law?
No, I mean, everything you had to say was completely correct. A little bit about me. So I'm of South Asian descent. I am the first generation in my family that actually went to university. And I think when you're from an immigrant family background, especially for South Asians, there's an expectation that you'll study, and it's not necessarily expected of women. It's more expected of the boys than it is of the women in the household. But my father, I think when I was younger, said to me, "Well, you know, what's it going to be, doctor or lawyer?" And I said, "Dad, I don't like blood." And he said, "Well, a lawyer it is," and that's kind of how I fell into law. But I made it my own. You know, I love what I do. I'm very passionate about it, and I think that's crucial to everything we do. I think the reason women get ahead, the reason that women succeed, is because they've got passion, they've got commitment to what they want to do, and they've got a determination to prove themselves. And I think, you know, everything Alison said and that you've touched on already, we try harder, you know, we work harder because there's more expected of us. As a woman coming through the profession, initially, I guess I didn't think that I would be in any way diminished or not taken as seriously as my sort of male counterparts, and so not in the same vein as no less equal to my white counterparts. But actually that happened time and time again, and sometimes in the way I was discussed, sometimes in some of the jokes that were made around me, with the kind of expectation that I would just brush them off because I was a good sport. Sometimes the kind of literature, the presentations that would end up on my desk. I think I've mentioned to you before, I was very early on in my career, I was offered a pamphlet on flirting for business, because, you know, I wasn't prepared to go on a date with somebody that might be useful to the firm. Those sort of things shouldn't happen. You know, you should be able to walk into a room and not be judged on the color of your skin, on, you know, on your gender, whatever that is, on your preferences, on your disability or otherwise. I think actually you should be judged on one thing, and that is your competence to do the work. You know, it's your merit, it's the hard work you put in, the passion that you bring to everything you do and you talk about. And really that should be the overarching factor in everything we do, but it isn't. That's the sad reality. And I found that time and time again. You know, a colleague would be promoted over me, and there wasn't really any perceptible reason why that would be the case. Or I'd go into a meeting room and the men would talk, and sort of the woman was expected to go and get the tea and coffee. I make a point now not to offer to make the tea and coffee, because, you know, that shouldn't be automatically. And actually, you know, now at sort of an established point in my career, I look back at some of the things I've been through, and I think, well, why was I put in those situations? Why did I not have a greater sense of support from the firms that I worked at, or the people I worked at? They tried their best based on what they understood, but now there's so much more awareness. There's a lot more clarity and a lot more guidance, and I think really that's what's needed. You know, the way I've seen the firms that I've worked with evolve, become a lot more aware of the conversations that need to be had, the creation of those safe spaces where, you know, junior talent is nurtured regardless of the background you come from, or, you know, or what your characteristics may be. One of the best things I ever saw was a law firm that I worked in, where actually the employment lawyer was unable to see, and she did everything by braille, which I thought was fantastic. You know, that was inspirational. Very early on in my career, I met, and I was still at university, my first year at university, I met a black barrister, was the first one I'd ever seen. And, you know, and she would talk to me and tell me about the things that she was going through. And I think that's what we need. We need role models. We need people who are kind of breaking the barriers and showing people that things can happen. And I think once you actually go through that and you're in that surroundings, and now that we're in an environment where there is a lot more awareness, actually a lot of support. You know, I've been very fortunate. I've worked at some exceptional firms who are very good about, you know, empowering the female agenda. But there is so much more to be done. You know, we're not really touching anywhere near where we need to be. And in order to enable new talent to come in, I think this is an ongoing exercise. We have to keep looking at ourselves. We have to be having these conversations. We have to be creating safe spaces where people can speak up because they're uncomfortable, or because something was said that was inappropriate or was unacceptable. And that we need to keep allowing people to progress solely based on their merit. And I think when you do that, you create role models for other people to come in. And it's our job and our responsibility, when we reach a certain point, to look at people who might be coming forward and, you know, giving them the opportunity, you know, allowing them to come forward and showing them what can be done, and mentoring them. You know, we've touched on that before, Steph. Mentoring and coaching and really encouraging the next generation.
I agree completely, and I know that, you know, when I was first starting over here, and I went into a room, I can honestly say the environment's changed quite a bit, because I recall going in as a subject matter expert on a round table, and I was the only female in the room other than the moderator, and the gentleman next to me, as I was raised to do, I was pouring myself a glass of water, so poured one for him. And he was very sweet, he was very nice, and he said thank you. And then as we were rounding up and getting ready to start, he turned to me and he said, "Oh, on your way out, can you grab the empty bottles so that they're not on the table?" And I smiled, as we're trained to do. Let's be very honest. We've been trained to smile, so it's not uncomfortable. And the moderator looked completely aghast, for lack of a better word, there like that, her face. And she very quickly proceeded to introduce me. And it was one of those where I saw the gentleman, his face went completely white, and then much like the cartoons, filled up with red. And later he did apologize, and I thanked him for taking accountability. And I just said, I think it's a lesson learned. And I do think that that has improved, and I do think that in some of the different pieces of the industry. I do think, for instance, operations, which is obviously why I invited Grace as well. I think that it's improving every day, but there's still some room to grow on that. And I do think, as I said, the operational part of the build to rent industry has really started with relative strength in creating a more gender diverse workplace. However, there's still plenty of work to do on creating a more equitable and inclusive environment for our employees, as we really consider that the C-suite and investment parts are still heavily dominated by, let's just say, perhaps a bit more of a traditional workforce. And we all recognize that actually when we have different ideas, different backgrounds, different views walking into our businesses, it does improve things. So Grace, I mean, you've built a career path that really, much like myself, you never planned on. It was a different turn for you. You turned right when you had thought that you were going to turn left. So tell us about that, and how did your leadership, teach you about the leader you do and don't want to be? And also, what part did allyship, mentorship play within your growth?
Okay. Yeah, so similar to Bella, I'm from an immigrant background, and it was very much education. You work 5 times as hard as everyone else, and that's what you do. So for me, I was the quintessential, I do extracurriculars, and I've got a plan for 5 years. Got to university, plan fell apart, and I can honestly say, best thing that happened to me, because it made me stop and think, what do I want to do next? And this is where property came in and saved me. So I joined for what I told myself was three months. So I joined an entry level role as an office manager for a firm that worked in commercial management, and then were inching into residential very slowly. So said to myself, I'll do this for 3 months. I'll figure out what I actually want to do with my life, because I didn't actually at that point see it as a career. So I had gone through careers fairs, etc., and this was never an option that I thought was available to me. So in terms of growth through, funnily enough, I've always reported in or worked for men. I've never, until very recently, reported into a woman. And so going through that journey, it was starting as an office manager, taking a bit more responsibility and actually figuring out, I like this. I like the variety. I like having to be creative. And in terms of leadership, just looking back through, we say leaders like they're role models. They stand up here, but they're still people, and people are complex. So the best leadership traits are ones that I learned from the same person that I had some not so good traits and I didn't want to be that. So in terms of empowerment, there's a few standouts for me where they empowered me and they actually believed in me before I actually believed in myself. And so quite often the imposter syndrome would creep in and I'd say, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to handle this. And it was very much a view of, well, you need to do this. I'm going to let you figure it out. I will help you along, but I need you to figure it out. And apart from screaming in my head quite often at the beginning of my career, I then realized that these seemingly impossible things that I thought I couldn't do, with a little bit of support, I actually could. And so going through that, it was also persistence. So there's a standout moment in my head where I was managing a commercial asset, 21 floors, it was being prepped for permitted development, quite a lot of responsibility. And someone walks in and says, I want to speak to the manager. And I say, yeah, I am the manager. No, where is he? Your work experience or something, aren't you? And so, like you say, you're trained to kind of smile. And I think I made some joke about, having a youthful appearance, but I was the manager and actually found myself having to convince him to believe what I was saying. And so, in the moment, laughed it off. When I was actually thinking about it, it's like, oh, wow, it doesn't matter, how much I do. There's still someone who's going to walk in and not quite believe that someone like me would have that level of responsibility. And I think even looking at the way that situation was dealt with at the time by my line manager, in making sure that I felt supported and actually calling it out when he heard about the situation. It kind of reaffirmed for me that, okay, right, I've done my bit, but actually allyship is super important here. It's all good and well me thinking and saying things, but if I feel supported by people around me, it reaffirms that this isn't quite right. And I think it goes a very long way because, similar to you, Steph, he did actually come and apologize and say, I'm so sorry, I'm mortified. But, going through that instance. But then on the flip side, within that, it was compassion in leadership. So there have been times where I've reported into people who aren't quite respectful when they're talking. It doesn't matter what level we're at. I've always been brought up. It's like you talk to people with respect. How you expect people to treat you, you treat them. And so I went through a period of time always largely being surrounded by men. I saw compassion as maybe a little bit of a weakness, and I had to be super, super firm to make sure that my voice was heard and everything that I was saying was coming across in the right way. But I learned very quickly that compassion is actually very much a superpower. I don't actually think you can be a good leader without it, because compassion drives awareness, it drives support, it drives loyalty in your team. And whether we're looking at gender, race, socio-economic background, without that compassion, without that awareness, I don't think we can actually progress as much as we need to or as far as we need to go. And so, yeah, going through kind of my journey and actually stopping and thinking, because I think that's the thing that a lot of us are guilty for. We work very, very hard and we do great things, and you just keep going and trying to get to the next point, and stopping and recognizing is a very, very important thing that I've been trying to teach myself, really. And I think next generation, the way that I didn't know it was an option, the way that I didn't think I fitted into this industry, is I think it's super important that next gen of actually getting the word out there. And recently attended a careers fair, and I had loads of kids about 14, 15 coming up to us and saying, well, I don't want to work on a building site, so I don't think I can speak to you. And it was actually explained to them, well, you can be good at the numbers, the people side of things. There's so much that falls under this bracket. And just having that conversation actually showed that we've got quite a way to go in actually getting word out there and telling people this is an option for them and they do fit in here somewhere.
Yes. And one of the things that, obviously was raised was about representation. And I mean, I was lucky that I started out in this industry in the US where it was already fairly diverse as far as gender. I had some phenomenal mentors who, much like Grace, you experienced, they believed in me at moments when I didn't necessarily, especially as, a young mom, thinking about getting back into the workforce. And I actually fell into the industry on accident. It was supposed to be something for just a little bit that I could do some part-time work while my daughter was quite young, until I needed to go back full time, and I fell in love with it. And then I was inspired by some really phenomenal women and also by some really great men who, taught me about great leadership. And, much like our parents, they teach us the things that we do and don't like in the leadership. But seeing that actually did tell me, you know what? Actually, someday I could be a vice president. I could be a CEO, and what I always appreciated, well, when I first started, it was very, kind of linear. You were a leasing agent or you were an accountant. Those were the two ways you really got into the industry. And then you went into assistant manager, and then you were, but actually, like you said, Grace, there are so many other avenues in. It could be that somebody's coming in on supplier side. It could be somebody's coming in, through the marketing divisions, or, it could be that they are coming in, via leasing or construction. And construction is an area where we're starting to see some improvements as well. I mean, Mandisa from Greystar is a fantastic example of somebody who can really excel, who's really excelled in the construction world. And she and I've had conversations even about that, she is kind of a maybe an extraordinary example of how, you can get in and really build a fantastic career around that. So I mean, I think that one concept that was also raised, and is about us leading by example. So how is it that we can create, really this safe space for employees to address potential negative or even misogynistic behavior, and this can expand to all areas of diversity, for instance, orientation, ethnicity, age. Age is one that a lot of people overlook. And, and really think about that, because if we're not comfortable at a senior level to address something? How can we actually say, rightfully so, to new generations coming in as well, that it is a safe space for them? So, Grace, why don't we start with you? Because I know that obviously, as you said, you're working with a lot of younger people trying to get into the industry.
Yeah, I think generally it's this concept of calling in versus calling out. So I'm thinking of this feeling comfortable, calling out maybe misogynistic, racist, or other kinds of behavior that aren't acceptable. It's first of all, it's getting through that defense mechanism, because what I've seen, and I've kind of been part of it myself, is you're in a group setting, someone says something that isn't quite right, and I've seen the reaction where 3 or 4 people say, "Oh my God, you can't do that," and the embarrassment kind of sets in. There's a defensiveness, and it doesn't really get anywhere. Whereas I've approached it in that way, but I've also said, "Okay, can I have a word? You can't do this, this, and that for this reason." And generally, I find with that approach, people will first of all say, "Oh my God, I'm mortified." But what I've seen work even better is that it's like, right, I didn't actually realize that this was a thing, and how do I realize? And I think it's really coming back down to the education piece. And for people to actually be educated, they need to admit that they don't quite get it right, but none of us do. There will be some way, shape, or form where we will overstep a line or take a misstep. And I think being able to admit that you've taken a misstep and actually educate yourself. And I think it's very important not to expect the maybe offended party to be the one to give you all of the education. I think it's a group effort. There's personal responsibility here, but I think we also need to kind of look at the way we're dealing with it, and it needs to be a bit more collaborative, I think, because it does get quite fractious at times, I've seen.
Yeah, well, and I think you're right. It can set off a defense mechanism. And, if we think about unconscious bias, Allison, I know that you've obviously experienced unconscious bias before, and, the impact that that can have, even some of the just joking comments. So, how have you addressed some of that, perhaps even within your team or within the industry that you've seen that were effective?
I think one of the first things is, is that awareness and that educating piece. And my default is not to be defensive and to antagonize the situation, but to see if I can, from conversation, make improvements. And the openness and that culture of a non-toxic environment, and to do everything we can to ensure that it doesn't happen again in the future, but the people are being educated as a result of it, is a great result, as opposed to feeling that it's going to wind you up or it's going to irritate you, and that it's being meant with all the wrong intentions. For example, I've been in situations where I've been in large board meetings, large groups of being the only female, and then, they're going off for dinner and I've got to go off to a meeting them later for dinner. And the comment is, "Oh, she's going off to get her nails done." And they all have a laugh about it. But actually, no, I'm not going to have my nails done. I'm actually going to a really important meeting, and I'm going to be meeting you later on. But it's that perception. How does it make somebody feel when they are then, that comment is made? It's something that they need to just have an awareness of, actually, because I think that in a lot of cases, it's not intentional, but depending on where you are as an individual, and particularly your position within an organization, it can really be intimidating, depending on what role you're in and who it is that's making the comments. If it's people that are more senior to you, for example, it can be really quite a big deal. And I think that, a lot of this does start, I know we talk a lot about younger years and that culture. And I think that, that openness and that kind of ability to call things out is something that's a lot more common in the younger generation coming through now, which is a positive thing. Whereas, perhaps in my generation, or those that, are in my team, it perhaps was a bit taboo to call something out. But I think that actually it's all about really having those decent conversations and having the space where it's okay to say, "I don't feel quite comfortable about that. How it was said, it made me feel like this." And like you say, in a lot of cases, they're going to be, "Oh my God, I didn't even think about it, I'm really sorry, but you know, there have been lots of situations, having said that, where I've been in and they've told me to make the tea, or they've told me, am I there to make the notes, or, you know, all the usual stuff, when, you know, thankfully those days have diminished over the years quite significantly. But I think that definitely the awareness and educating piece is the kind of positive mindset we need to take.
Absolutely. And I think, you touched on something that's really important there. And I think this has kind of stemmed through the conversation so far, but it's a lot about company culture. And, really getting that buy-in from the top to the bottom, bottom to the top, as far as seniority within the company. And it needs to carry through all of the different levels. And if we think about companies are changing or should be changing. We have a lot of conversations with recruiters as part of the UK Apartment Association and even beyond, and really think about conversations around, well, actually, people aren't just looking for that paycheck. They're not wanting to necessarily go to a company and stay there for their entire adult life. People are more willing now, and I think it was exacerbated even more after COVID, when we had a little bit more perspective on the value of life, I want to be someplace where I'm seen as my whole self. And anybody who knows me has heard me talk about the whole self, because we all have our quirks, and that's what makes us actually really interesting people. Like, we all have our different backgrounds, and we all have our different passions, and those lead us to being excellent in what we do. But that being said, let's talk a little bit about really the risks of not creating that inclusive workplace. Just to think about the fact that the average cost alone of finding a new employee is £40,000. When you count in time that they're vacant, potentially having temp work coming in, recruitment costs, and then there are so many other impacts, even just the impact that it has on the other employees' stability, the time to train, let's explore that a little bit, because I think that it goes much further, and a lot of people tend to think that EDI is soft and fluffy, but it actually has very tangible commercial impact. So Bella, how do you feel like, companies are starting to evolve recruitment processes and attracting new people on that front, and really starting to take into account the potential impact of losing good people?
So, I think we've touched on a few things there already, and I think that's right. We're in a very different sector to how things were when I started out. There's a lot more awareness. I think both Alison and Grace have touched on it. A lot more awareness, a lot more accountability, and I think that's the critical piece. We have a situation now where people are unafraid to actually perhaps say. And we are good at creating the safe spaces, but there needs to be accountability behind that. It's not enough just to say to people, actually, we are, you can come and talk to us if there's an issue. What you've also got to be able to do is act on it as a consequence. What do you need to do to actually then resolve the position? It's no good having a safe space and a forum for someone to voice an opinion if there's any action associated with it. And I think that's the critical piece now, really. It is about the action. It is about encouraging a new generation to come forward, looking at diversity, looking at not only gender, ability, whether you need personal circumstances need to be taken into account, because actually it turns out we all spend a lot of time at work, and we spend a lot of time with the people that we're working with. So actually, if you don't look after the culture of the firm, don't look after the people who are actually in the firm, then people are going to leave. People stay for people. They stay because they like the people they're working with. They like the management, they like the way they're being treated. And ultimately, all of us deserve and have the right to be, treated with respect in everything we do. There's a lot of women that are coming into law. And, it's really been encouraging over the last few years to see there's different avenues for coming in. So you're not limited to just having to go into the traditional routes. Before it was you did a law degree and then you became a lawyer. Then it became you could actually do any other degree and then do a conversion. And then you could become a lawyer. Now there's apprenticeship schemes available. So there are lots of different ways of coming in. And I think that's critical. And I think really that's where all of this ties in. What we're hopefully creating is women and people from a different background or, who've got different needs, being able to articulate what they're able to do, on being judged on their merits, and then creating on the other end people who are receptive to that and are supportive of that. And we've touched on allyship a few times, but that sort of upbringing, that sort of importance that everybody has in their life actually starts from the home. It starts from people that you're surrounded with as you're growing up. It started with me, with my father, sort of saying to me that I could be this, I could be a lawyer, I could be a solicitor. It started with a lady that I used to work with, one of the partners I used to work with, who was 60 years old before she became a partner. She at 42, she decided she wanted a career change. She requalified as a solicitor, and she was one of the people that I worked with, and she was inspirational. And right at the start of my career, she was somebody I worked with, and that taught me, touching on a point that you raised, Steph, that actually, there's no expiration date on dreams. You can aspire at any point of your life, and we're actually in a very exciting time. Because actually, if you want to apply for something, you want to be something, then you've got the ability to apply for that. And if you don't get it, if it doesn't happen, then they'll do what you said, Steph, which is they're going to walk to somebody else, and somebody else will benefit from their skills, from their passion, and from their ability to deliver. And I think that's what it is. And now people talk with their feet, unfortunately. So actually, there is accountability. If you don't take action, they will.
Yeah,
Absolutely. One of the Grace, sorry, did you?
Yeah, sorry, I was just to add to that, I completely agree with what Bella was saying. I think with the action side of things, so the allyship kind of merging or maybe evolving into sponsorship, because I think from a retention perspective, it's all going to well attracting people into industry, but it's especially when you get to that kind of middle management stage and you can't quite see where there's a sideways move or upwards, it does require sponsorship, and that doesn't have. It's not just women, it's not just men, but there needs to be active participation there, because that's where a lot of people do get frustrated, and then figure out, there's nothing for me here, let me go somewhere else. And I think it's a shame, because you then get that brain drain and you lose all this creativity and passion, because we haven't maybe quite had the right kind of conversations or provided the upskilling or the additional support to make people feel like I don't just come in and stay where I am or climb a couple of rungs. There is actually more for me. I think that's super important.
That's a fantastic point. And Alison, curious from your perspective, if we think about the upskilling and the helping people realize the career path, really thinking about the impact that can have on that employee retention, and just, also keeping people in the industry overall. I mean, how are you putting things in place with your teams to actually have those upskills, and help people understand the different pieces that they can actually, I guess, evolve into within the industry?
So, we're not looking to necessarily positively discriminate when we look to employ people to join our organisation, but to show that manufacturing and supplying into the construction and BTR market is hugely exciting. So it brings so much opportunity to grow, gain exposure to a variety of roles. And within our manufacturing business, for example, we have sales, marketing, R&D, HR, compliance, manufacturing, finance. There's loads and loads of different departments. And because of that, there's loads of opportunity. And we're not saying that we want to keep people in boxes. It's all about opportunity, growth, nurturing, having that passion, and playing to people's strengths. Within each age, then you need different skills and strengths, and it does start at a young age. For example, I spoke in a local school to age 10s recently, and they were so receptive, so open, enthusiastic, engaged, passionate, and regardless of their gender, they were genuinely interested in all the different roles within manufacturing. To them, there was no other filter. There was no agenda. They were just genuinely interested, and so many positive questions came from that. It was heartwarming. But actually, as the headmaster said to me afterwards, for most of those children, they'll go back to families who are third generation not working, and they will be discouraged from going into manufacturing or construction. because it will deem to be a place not for them. So at that young age, they are feeling it and seeing it and engaging with it. And you can see how that it's just naturally linking to something within each of them. And once you can manage to get them in, then it's a question of, you know, opening their eyes to giving them exposure and making them feel as though anything is possible. And we want to empower. We don't want to put the lid on people. We want people to shine. And as I say, a square peg in a square hole, but that might mean a few changes along the way to find something where people really feel as though they love it and they enjoy it and it's the right place for them. But that comes from having flexibility and openness and that culture again, isn't it, within the organization?
Well, and I do think actually you raised a really valid point. You know, we've already seen, even in, you know, the wake of Brexit, which we won't get into politics on that front, but we, you know, just the fact that like there is a very tangible lack of skilled labor, and there's nothing wrong. Like for so long, the push was, no offense, Bella, but you need to be an attorney, you need to be a doctor, you need to you know, but it is one of those where actually, if somebody is amazing with their hands, there is nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. You know, I have a nephew who just got into plumbing and he's absolutely loving it. And there is a massive shortage, which obviously then drives up prices, has a direct impact on the economy, the ability to build more homes, so on and so forth. And you know, I do think that those are actually some really interesting things that we're starting to see more women going also into trade skills. I know a bricklayer who is paving the way and very vocal about getting more women in, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I celebrate her all the time. And I did want to touch on, you know, mental health. You know, it does have a direct impact, and it's not just when you're younger that you're feeling imposter syndrome. I'm hearing from more and more of our peers who are our age, you know, and senior levels, who, especially as you reach a certain point and maybe you're not quite as young and vibrant anymore, we all have our days when we're feeling our age. You know, we feel like, well, you know, am I being overlooked, you know, because I'm not shiny, or was I only being looked at because I was shiny? You know, you feel the pressures of taking care of your children at the same time that, you know, you're worried about taking care of a new deal that's on the table, you know, a new acquisition or whatever the case may be. And I think that there's a direct impact on mental health, and that, you know, we're starting to see more where companies are opening conversations. I'm very lucky that one of my prior companies, there was a group that would actually talk about menopause, all the stuff that our parents didn't, you know, our mothers never talked about because all they talked about was a hot flash. But actually, the impact on your anxiety level, the sometimes brain fog that can come about, you know exactly what you want to say, but that word just is not going to come to you. You know, and so, you know, I think it's great that organizations are empowering us to have some of those conversations. Not enough are quite yet, but you know, there are still kind of comments that'll come across, maybe a bit of a microaggression of, oh, it must be that time of the month. Sorry for anybody on the call that on the WebEx that is maybe a little bit more sensitive to topics like that. We won't go into details, but you know, we all know that that's a little unfair. Everybody has a right to have a moment where you call something out, and it's not necessarily sensitivity. So you know, let's explore that a little bit about imposter syndrome and about mental health impact and maybe some of those microaggressions that we're aware of, but how, you know, do we actually reach the people who are probably not going to join a session like this and maybe need to hear those things the most? So, Grace, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I would say in terms of microaggressions, I'm a black woman, and it's ranged from unprompted polls as to which hairstyle they like on me the most and things like that. But I think actually in terms of that latter part of getting people who maybe don't join these calls to actually take notice, I think the best example, and this was a microaggression that I couldn't quite articulate and I was trying to explain it, where someone had made a comment about a point where I had been I'd put my foot down about something. It was 100% the right thing to do. I was asking a question because we needed to know the answer, and this person just wouldn't answer the question and pretended like they couldn't hear me. So I obviously had said, okay, right, I've asked you a question 3 times. I just need an answer. Not rude, just very, very, determined. And so they had then gone to my line manager at the time and said the kind of buzzwords that people often say about Black women: aggressive, non collaborative, etc. And so my line manager, we had a great relationship. So he came to me and said, this is what's been said. I've shut it down. But he didn't quite understand the connection between those specific words and just what they mean when you are a Black woman or woman from an ethnic minority background. And so even trying to explain that, I was like, I love the fact that you shut it down. That was the right thing to do. But actually, what you don't understand is that when people use these very specific words, this is what it means, this is the history behind it. And so even through that one conversation, that one example, from that point, it was a case of, okay, right, it's not quite how I see it. I didn't know this. I need to explain it. So I think when it comes to things like this, or even any other kind of, and I hate the use of the term, but fringe cause, that's what people think EDI is. It's just, it's soft and it's on the side. But actually, if the people who don't normally attend or think it's a woman issue, it's a race issue, it's a disability issue, it's those people who are affected who should drive the cause and attend. But actually, to your point, Steph, around the recruitment, where actually this impacts all of us and we don't quite notice what the impact is. It could be financial, it's business productivity. And I think to speak the language that people understand, maybe we kind of take an approach where this is the result and this is what's causing it. Because if you said to someone £40,000 every single time, that number will make certain people jump, and then you start explaining. So I think it's almost like you have to lure people in with the things that are gonna make them
That's
stand up.
exactly why I said
Get up
it.
and pay
Yeah.
attention. Yeah, exactly.
But you're right. And actually, I mean, funny enough, and I know Bella and you and I have had this conversation. Sometimes it's actually a microaggression about even where you're from. So, and not necessarily around ethnicity, but I mean, in the States, for instance, I was living in the Midwest, and depending on who I'm talking to, my New York accent either comes out very strong or it's very mellow. And I remember somebody telling me once, "Oh, you're really nice for a New Yorker." And I'm like, wait a minute, like how did you just really say that? It's not like every New Yorker is a horrible person. Every place has a horrible person. But actually, what I have found as well is that in business, sometimes you might hear an accent, like, in the States, if you're from down south, sometimes you're not taken as seriously in the boardroom. Or, Bella, you mentioned a colleague who was from up north, and she was advised that she might want to work on her elocution a little bit. These are different things that can definitely have a huge impact on mental health. I do want to talk a little bit about, we only have a few minutes, so I'm conscious of that. And soon we'll see Brendan flagging us down, then we need to tie up. But events as we're planning for our teams on site, for our residents, really just kind of thinking about how we can make that more inclusive. And one of the things, and I'll turn over to you guys in a moment because I want to maybe do a little quick fire, toss some ideas out. But like, for instance, one of the things that I found inspiring is that my co-chair for the EDI committee, Kevin, he's heading to MIPIM next week, and he wanted to do one of the activities. But actually, a lot of the activities are around, running, they're around cycling, and he has some mobility concerns. So he's actually started up a walking tour for Canada, which I think is fantastic, because it is about making sure that you have accessibility for everybody. And Grace, I know you've got a lot of experience with setting things up for your teams as well as for your residents. Can you share a couple ideas?
Yeah, I think it's something as simple as just suppliers. So we will throw events for residents. So Wembley Park, we're based in Brent, it's the most diverse borough in London. So we would have that kind of age-old trap of you fall in, you get the supplier because you know they're reliable. But actually, if you look at just outside your doorstep, there are loads of people of, minority background who run a business, and just that bit of support makes a difference. So, case in point, I was the chair of the Culture Club, which was our race and ethnicity network, and we would run events, and food is a big draw for people. So it's like, right, the food can only come within this square mile radius. These are the caveats. You need to give the business to people who maybe struggle to advertise a bit more. People don't know they're there, they're independent. And so even something as simple as that, whether it's resident events or internal events, where you actually start looking at your supply line and thinking, how can I actually change this up? and maybe make things a little bit more fair rather than going to the same places all the time. And yeah, we've had so many testimonials from local businesses where staff members have come and you've said this is where the food is from, and they've seen an uptake in people going to them because no one knew they were there. And it's just little things like that, really.
Absolutely. And even as we're planning events, taking into account for dietary, it could be driven because of health or it could be driven out of faith as well. But also, sometimes it's very common in our industry to go for drinks, but actually, what if you do have employees that potentially are recovering alcoholics or they don't drink because of faith reasons or just by choice, making sure that we're opening those options up. Um, I would like to, because we are the UKAA and we believe in turning words into action, I would like to take away from this, a commitment. What should our industry be looking at doing? So if I can ask each of you to just share an idea that we can start to move forward as an industry and perhaps even within your own organization. Why don't we start with Alison?
Yeah, well, I think for me, it's to continue with the goal of the openness, the communication within the organisation. I think, we talk about communication a lot. We have suggestion schemes. We have our constant communication within teams. But I think it's to formalise that a little bit more and to recognise that regardless of what it is, you need to talk about whether it is well-being, mental health, issues surrounding equality, diversity, inclusion, whatever it is. These are very real challenges that we face every day, and people have to feel as though they have a voice. I think it's very, very important for people to feel as they can feed back into an organisation that's going to be taken seriously. So that's something that we're really working on going forward.
Absolutely. And one thing that we did find, we heard from some of the participants from the Swift Bunny studies that we've done in the past, is some people were almost afraid to get the feedback because they didn't know what to do with it. But all I can say is start somewhere. Start having some of the conversations, do it with an open heart, maybe even a bit of Chatham House rules. That's something that we're going to be doing as the EDI committee. We're going to be going out and talking to the committees. In fact, our first point of action is meeting up with the ops committee to get some of that feedback as we're thinking about priorities and how we can support and start progressing things within the industry even more. Bella, what are you thinking?
I'll go off mute first. I think it's twofold for me, really. I think it's really important for people to have people they can connect with. So when you see somebody reaching out, because people do reach out, they're a bit nervous about asking, but if they see somebody who's perhaps from the same socioeconomic background or have something that they can connect to or relate to, they will gingerly connect out, and just being receptive to those approaches and encouraging them and supporting them. And also, I think that kind of ties in with something I think very passionately about. It is that mentorship. It's something I've been very fortunate to have. I have worked with some phenomenal women and people who've come from backgrounds that are not typical, not traditionally what you would see perhaps in law. And also just being vocal. I think each of us have that accountability and that responsibility to talk about these things. Participate in events like this where we can actually talk about some things which impact so many people that otherwise wouldn't be heard and wouldn't receive a forum. And I just want to touch on one thing. I think it's fantastic that we are now, as from ESG and EDI and all the rest of it, is sort of being considered when you go out for pitches. So I think it's important as a corporate social responsibility element that when you're applying for pitches and bids and things like this, people are asking for this sort of information. It's important. It attacks the bottom dollar. It's what people are going to be worried about and are going to be concerned if there's an immediate financial impact on them as a consequence of not, supporting EDI principles and objectives. And I think the fact that we're seeing more and more of that means that actually people are going to be more and more receptive. So hopefully that continues.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, we've tossed around within the EDI committee, getting feedback on potentially starting up mentorship programs. So I'd love to pursue that. And Grace, what's
Okay, I
your
think Brendan's
commitment?
popped up. So very quickly, I
Yes,
will
yes.
say, I think for those of us who, are in relative positions of power and have voices, it's actually drawing the non-standard people into those conversations, sharing events, and actually applying, lovingly pressure to actually get people involved in those conversations. I think it's something each of us can do in our kind of own remit, and it's just really pushing on that, because I think without bringing those people in, we're stunting just how much we can actually get done here.
Yes, allyship, and yes, so I'm hearing the underlying themes: conversation, allyship, mentorship, which I think is at the heart of everything that we do. So, Brendan, you're popping up, so I know it's time is now being called.
Time has been cool, but I think it's been an amazingly candid and important conversation. Some real insights there, but probably the cultural piece is the most important piece, the changing culture and the need to accelerate that change. I think from the UKAA's perspective, we will be launching our code of practice for the industry after MIPIM. Details on that to follow. But really, that's a cultural piece. It's about creating the right kind of culture in build to rent, which will include much of what you've spoken about. But in order to deliver on that culture, all the things that you spoke about need to be actioned within our industry, within our sector. And if we can do that, or just make good progress on that, I think we will do exactly that. We'll make progress perhaps better than others, because I think the heart of the industry is there to support that. So I'd like to thank you all very, very much for the session today. I think it's been highly valuable, and look forward to working with the committee going forward. Just a small plug for next week. We have an important one, energy economics, a webinar from Hawley. It's always fascinating what those guys come up with, but I don't want to take anything away from International Women's Day. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.